Legal questions that follow an accident or death can be complex and deeply personal. Injuries, lost wages, mediation, and lawsuits make it absolutely necessary to get expert advice. Today, we speak with one of Eastern Ontario's leading personal injury law firms to get some critical questions answered. Hello, I'm Michael Curran from the Ottawa Business Journal. Today we speak with a personal injury law firm that recently ranked in Canada's top 10. They help clients uncover their rights and recover their lives. Please welcome the founding partner of Bergeron Clifford, Chris Clifford. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. So let's kick off with a really simple question. If there are prospective people out there that unfortunately have been injured or, God forbid, someone's lost a life, what is the most important factor in selecting a personal injury law firm?
Well, there's a lot of different factors that go into it, but in terms of one of the most important factors, I think, is comfort level. You need to be comfortable with the lawyer that you're going to be working with. Personal injury claims are different than a lot of other claims that the courts might see. They're often stressful, and they're often they're not quick. So you're going to be working with your lawyer for a while, 18 months to 2.5 years. So you need to be comfortable and confident in the counsel that you're going to be walking with.
I wanted to dig into process and timing a little bit. It must be one of the big questions that you get on a frequent basis. So how do you put people to ease and minimize the stress? Because by definition, this is going to be perhaps one of the most stressful situations that people ever face. So how do you put them at ease, and how do you explain that process and timing?
Sure, that's a great question, Michael. And we can't eliminate the stress that naturally occurs in a civil action case. It's part of the process, but we can certainly make it easier. And I think the way that we do that is through knowledge. Uncertainty creates the stress, and to a great extent. So if we can provide our clients, and I think we do a pretty good job at it, provide our clients with all the information that they need, even with respect to the uncertainty, if we can identify and explain the areas where there is uncertainty, I think that fulsome knowledge of what the timelines and what the process and what the steps are can go a long way to not eliminating the stress, but certainly removing the mystery into the claim and the unknowns.
And in terms of that timing question, you referenced it just a minute ago. What would I know every case is individual and will roll out in a very particular way, but if you were to generalize a little bit, what should people's expectations be in terms of process and timing?
Sure. With the caveat that each case can be a little bit different. For most people, if we're dealing with an adult, children can naturally take longer, particularly if there's been trauma to the brain, right, a head injury. That can take much longer if you're dealing with a child, because you have to wait until they reach developmental milestones before you can identify or at least get to know where maybe some of the damage has been. But if you can say run-of-the-mill case involving an adult with maybe a fractured hip or a leg, we like to think of it as 18 months to 2.5 years. That's pretty efficient, but we like to either have the case done or the finish line in sight within that time period. When you're dealing with fractures, for example, it can be 12 months to 18 months before you can get a med-legal opinion on what the long-term impact is going to be. And you can't resolve a case before you have an idea what the horizon looks like. So that's where the delay comes in. But if you move the case along so it coincides with that with those final pieces of information that you need from the experts that you retain, then that's a pretty efficient timeline. 18 months to 2.5 years. If we don't have it finished, we'd like to see the finish line.
Thanks for that information. Chris, I wanted to ask you, when people think about personal injury, they might often think about news reports that deal with multi-million-dollar settlements, and I suspect, like a lot of our perceptions about the legal industry, it's taken off of U.S. television shows or something like that. But tell us, what is the realistic in a jurisdiction like Ontario, and how do courts come about making a decision in terms of monetary compensation?
Very good. You're right about the American influence, and the American jurisdictions are very different than what we have in Ontario or Canada, for that matter. But there's two broad heads of damages. The first one that I think of when I'm sitting down with a client is what we call general damages, and that's the same as a pain and suffering. So we expect to get a general damage award. The other heading is special damages, and you think of that as monetary awards. So loss of income, could be future care costs. We think of housekeeping, home maintenance, if somebody's having difficulty cutting their own lawn and maybe shoveling snow in the winter. So under the heading of special damages, the monetary losses, there can be some subheadings. But those are the two broad, most common heads of damages. There are a few others. You can get into punitive damages or aggravated damages. But in the sort of the usual course of a personal injury claim, those are the two heads of damages: general damages and special damages. And one of the unique things about Canada and Ontario is that there's an upper limit on what we can get for a general damages or a pain and suffering type award. We call it the cap. And in many jurisdictions in the US, there is no cap on what you can get for pain and suffering. And it goes back to an older case back in, if memory serves me correctly, like 1978. And it was a case called Grand and Toy. There was actually 3 cases before the Supreme Court of Canada. And back then they were dealing with a fellow who had been injured seriously. He was paralyzed from the neck down. And the Supreme Court of Canada put an upper limit on what we can recover in those most serious cases. And back then it was $100,000. With inflation, it's much higher now. But that becomes the cap, or the upper limit on what we can get for a pain and suffering award. There is no cap or upper limit on what we can receive for the loss of income or those special damages. So if you hear of Canadian cases that, or in cases out of Ontario where there's a large award because of serious injuries, I don't think of it as coming from the pain and suffering side. I think of it as maybe that lifetime of future care costs or not being able to work again. And that's one of the reasons why when I first meet somebody, it's very difficult to put a value on their claim. I can explain how it's valued, and I can talk about past experiences and get a sense of it. But it's over time, that 12 to 18 months, in some cases, sometimes longer, where you need to get those expert reports to identify what that long-term horizon looks like. And that's how you start putting values on the claim.
That's excellent. Very well put. Good to wrap your head around how they come together. Chris, I've asked a lot of technical questions. I want to ask a personal question, which is, why do you practice this type of law?
Oh, that's a good question, too. I started off doing insurance defense work way back in the very beginning, and it wasn't a particularly good fit for me. I sort of naturally gravitated towards representing individuals and their families. I always think of it as David versus Goliath as opposed to the other way around. And just with my own personal background, it was a better fit for me, and it was much more personal, and in many cases it was rewarding to try and help families navigate the waters after serious injuries. So so that's how I ended up on this side of the fence.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
And finally, Chris, I wanted to ask you, if someone's considering Bergeron Clifford as their legal representation, why would you say they should select your firm specifically?
Yeah, well, I'd tell people they should consider us. It's all that we do, and it's all that we've done for a very long time. And we have the number of lawyers in the firm that have been designated specialists in civil litigation, and others that will also be designated in due time once they've practiced long enough. So we've got the knowledge and the expertise to handle any personal injury matter. But I'd only tell people to consider us if they're comfortable with us, and you do that by meeting your counsel, meeting the team that's going to represent you, because it's not just the whole firm represents the people that we act for, and in particular we have a good team, So the other thing another factor is that we cover all the costs of the litigation, and we get paid on a contingency basis at the very end of the day, and our focus is on maximizing recovery. So in motor vehicle accident cases, we can make good use of the accident benefits that are available in order to maximize the recovery of our clients. Because at the end of the day, it's better to have your health than to have a great claim. So if we can maximize recovery, and then we use the civil system to compensate for the shortfall, and so those are factors to be considered.
And finally, Chris, Bergeron Clifford does business across all of Eastern Ontario. How can people contact you?
Good. Well, there's good information available on the internet, of course. You can visit our website. We have offices throughout Eastern Ontario where we meet people in those offices, or more often than not, we go right to their homes. So we can meet the individuals and their families. And we've toll-free numbers and local numbers, lots of access over the internet with emails, and with what we're going through now, the meetings, the Zoom meetings and FaceTime is getting more comfortable, and like we're doing right now, Michael. So there really is no barriers to meeting or getting a hold of us.
Thanks for joining us today, Chris.
Thank you, Mike.
Continued success at the firm.
I really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks.
Have a great day.
Okay, bye.